We are moving into an AI-enabled world. You've got to lean into this trend and not think that this trend doesn't affect you. A couple of reasons why you should do this. Firstly,
where do you see the kind of next 12 to 24 months and the evolution of the AI, especially with the candidate lens, and how you think it's going to impact the candidate over the next 24 months?
I've become increasingly convinced, for instance, AI doing a pre-screening call to candidates will become increasingly a mainstream feature of recruitment. Let's say you see a job ad, you apply for the job, but then you see within the ad there's an option that says, hey, listen, do you want to do an automated call? If you're successful in it, you go straight to the hiring manager. You don't even need to speak to the recruiter. Rather than sit here and wait for the CV black hole experience, I want to get this resolved here and now. I want to speak to this bot. You click on it, bot calls you up, and it just does pre-qualification screening. I think a lot of people click that link.
Hung Lee from Recruiting Brainfood, what are the top 3 pieces of advice you would give to a candidate in today's job market?
I'm pretty crystal clear on these. Number 1.
Hello and welcome to the Open to Work podcast. We are joined today by a bit of a legend in the recruiting space, the one and only Hung Lee, the founder of Recruiting Brainfood. And I won't go into too much detail, I'll let him speak for himself, but welcome, Hung. Such an honor to have you on the podcast.
Honor's all mine, Matthew. Thank you so much for setting up this conversational space, and yeah, I'm delighted to be on it.
And so as we start every episode of the Open to Work podcast, let's start with an interview question. So tell me about yourself as if I'd asked you in an interview.
Yeah, so basically, I still self-identify as a recruiter, Matt. So even though it's been probably a decade or more since I last sent a CV in anger, but I still am in the recruiting community. I was a recruitment agent for 10 years, worked in-house for half a dozen years, launched a few recruitment tech companies, and now I'm kind of like a person that supports the recruitment ecosystem, so to say, via newsletters, podcasts, events, and all the rest of it. So I would still describe myself as a recruiter, and I'm just wandering my way through this landscape as best I can with that identity.
Yeah, and for anyone who's a recruiter, you'll almost certainly know Hung and the Recruiting Brainfood newsletter. For anyone who's not in the industry, Hung, has undersold himself a little bit there. He's probably one of the most prominent speakers talking in the kind of recruiting landscape today. His Recruiting Brainfood email kind of newsletter is one of the many Brainfood products that is just absolutely having a huge impact on the recruiting industry. And so if you are a recruiter listening to this and you're not subscribing, go and subscribe today. I've been a subscriber for probably 5, 6, 7 years now, and read most Sundays. I'll take a flick through the kind of content that you pull together and share with the industry. I mean, when you just wind back, just to talk about you for a second, when you started that newsletter, did you have like any thought that this is where you would be so many years on?
No, not at all. I mean, Recruiting Brainfood was never, there was no strategy behind it. And there still isn't a strategy, man. I mean, a lot of people say, what do you want to do? How do you visualize what's the exit plan, etc. All of this. I got none, because it started with no plan. I mean, the genesis of Recruiting Brainfood was simply, I felt that the internet was just getting so big, so busy, so big. There was some great bits of content out there, but you had to click through 10 things to get the one thing that was worth it. And then over time, I just ended up like archiving the sources that seemed to be consistently producing quality material. Before you know it, I had a really nice database, which I went back to all the time, of sources that looked really interesting. And I just kind of occurred to me, look, other people might be having the same problem. Recruiters are super busy, they're operationally focused, they've got all this type of stuff going on. They don't have time to click through those 10 things. Is there a way in which I can help? And I thought, right, I've already clicked them, so why don't I just collect the best stuff into an email and get it out to people? And if people want to read it, then great. If not, also great. Because I was kind of doing it anyway. So yeah, there was never a plan around it. It was just I was trying to solve a personal problem, which was, the internet got too big, too busy. How can I kind of make it smaller? And yeah, it seems that other people got some value from it as well.
And I really relate to this story, and I think anyone who sits, who's started a business or kind of started a content, even content writing, the hardest thing to do is to start, and you fumble your way through such a long period of like working out like what it is that you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing, but it all comes from the idea of I want to help someone, and I want to help other people solve like this problem. And that's exactly what happened to James and I. Like we didn't know where we would go when we started this, but we were like, we're seeing this all the time. We're seeing this challenge of the kind of miscommunication of what's happening on the job market by people who weren't expert in it. And like, how do you navigate towards a source of truth in your job search? And so we were like, let's solve that problem and be that voice ourselves. And we had no idea that it would go where it's gone, and it still is kind of evolving in its own way, and we don't know where it's going to go in a year's time because the market's going to change. But yeah, it's the starting it and the want to help that I think is so critical in that journey.
100%, Matt. And anybody listening to this that has an idea or has a pressing issue that they want to try and solve, the best advice, and I think this is very consistent actually from people who've done it, is just simply to start. Just get it going, no matter what it is, no matter what condition it is. You need forward momentum. There's kind of like a physics behind it. I see a lot of people spend huge amounts of time doing, all the stuff that, the books tell you to do. Do the market development, do the market research, make sure, you learn all the skills, all this yada, yada, yada. But in fact, the best thing you can do is simply get something out there to start with, make a little bit of disturbance in the universe. And then from there, you end up getting information from that activity that then teaches you how you need to go forward to the next step. You go back to sort of how we first learned our skills, walking, talking. We weren't analyzing that. It was like, yeah, I'm going to just like stumble.
Yeah, we didn't get McKinsey in to give us the kind of the framework on how to stand up for the first time.
Exactly. We were just like, I'll give it a go. And you're going to fall in your ass. Of course you are. And it'll not be nice. And then you get up again. And then, then we've somehow forgotten that lesson in adulthood, but every new activity is going to be the same. It's like trying to stand up for the first time, taking your first step, mouthing your first word. It's going to be awkward, ugly. You're going to fail, guaranteed. You're going to fall, but just keep going. And then good things will happen from that forward momentum.
Yeah. Let's talk about failure for 1 second, given that you said the big word. Maybe because it looks from the outside that this was some like incredible, like thought through journey that you've come like this dominant force in recruiting. Maybe tell us about one of those failures that you had along the way.
I'm having failures right now.
Yeah, no one else saw the mic setup challenges that we had before we started. You think that would be something you would nail?
Exactly, fiddling with this, that, there's failures all the time, and I do think we need to rehabilitate the word. I know a lot of people like to say, "Oh, it was a learning opportunity." It was, let's not talk about failure. I think failure is totally fine. We can rehabilitate the word and have it kind of eliminate the negative connotation around that, because failing is actually something that is inevitable in any new or old endeavor, because you don't have full control of the universe. We're not like omnipotent deities. We're just like little human beings pottering about, and there's so many variables that interfere with our plans. So yeah, loads of failures. I can name you a number. I'm a person that's set up like 4 companies now. I can tell you absolutely 2 of them failed, right? A failure with a proper F. This is failure after 18 months, 2 years of effort, loss of money, one time close to bankruptcy. You know what? That's failure, under anybody's description. So failure is something that is, I think, fairly persistent thing in everyone's lives. The question is not the question is, how do you kind of deal and bounce back with failure, and what's your response to it? And also when you know when to quit on something. Again, you look at a poker player. A great poker player is not someone who's like exceptionally skilled at playing a particular hand. It's a person who's skilled at understanding the game is a long game and when to actually leave the table. Yeah. When do you stop? So that's a skill you learn as you get older. I'm sure it's a maturity thing. Yeah. The more times you're in businesses, I think you get kind of honed a little bit more as to when, okay, now's time when, this is not working, I've got to pivot.
Yeah. I think there's loads more we can get into there, but I'm conscious we want to talk about the candidates. I think any candidate listening to this, I think, can already start to hear some analogies around kind of starting your own business and kind of some of the kind of challenges that you face, even just through listening to some of these stories. But let's talk about the kind of broader candidate ecosystem right now. Like you're sitting you advise lots of companies, you see a huge horizontal kind of cross section of what's happening around the world in the candidate market right now, in the recruiting market. Like, what's your perception of what's happening in the candidate universe right now, I guess, when you look at it from both sides?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a very tough job market, right? I think that and the candidates at the coalface know this because they're the ones doing the applications, they're the ones being ghosted, they're the ones sort of looking at a LinkedIn job ad and seeing within 24 hours there's like 300 other applicants kind of in the frame. So yeah, it's a really tough marketplace. There's some macro reasons behind that. I think they're pretty clear. Basically, we had a long period of time where basically the cost of credit was very low. We had the zero interest rate period, which lasted for approximately 10 years, up until 2022, I think it was. And then the interest rates started getting cranked up by the US Federal Reserve, by the way. And essentially the relationship that institution has with the other central banks on the planet means that every other sort of country had to also hike up interest rates. Now, what this means is lots of money leaves the active economy and goes back into the banks. So it's a recapitalization of the financial system, but it also means that the cost of doing business becomes higher, which means that growth sort of plans are going to slow down. And we've seen that with sort of huge rationalizations for multinationals. I think anybody who's a large organization today, they're not thinking about hyper growth and hyperscale. If you remember that period, they're thinking now about efficiency, operational efficiency. That translates into layman's terms as job cuts. Basically, do more with less means less people doing the job. So that is a global phenomenon, and that's cascaded obviously into the job market that we see today. So yeah, very, very tough yards.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have this kind of other challenge, I think, for candidates it almost kind of goes back to what we were saying at the start, right? And where do you go to get valuable insights into how to navigate this job market? And I think that, my kind of personal belief on this, and I'd love to hear your kind of perception, is that we have, as a result of speaking to each other in the recruiting industry, we've forgotten to have a voice with our candidates, and we've forgotten to speak to the general public at scale. And as a result of this kind of ongoing period of internal discussion, other people and other content creators and other writers have filled that void with content that isn't built from expertise. It's written by journalists, it's written by content creators, it's written by people who are really good at building content on TikTok, but it's not built by recruiters. And I think that has further driven a wedge between the general public and the candidates ultimately that recruiters are dealing with and the recruiting industry, whilst also the recruiting industry has been potentially on its knees. Would love to hear your take on that. But I mean, what's your kind of perception on like that relationship that the candidates now have with their recruiters and how that's changed over the last kind of couple of years?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of the I wouldn't say disinformation. I think that's unjust. I think journalists are genuinely trying to sort of find out what's going on with regards to the tough job market. But there's a number of things that causes them to have sort of introduce inaccuracies, which could end up having a sort of misleading outcomes for job candidates. So, for instance, I criticized the phenomenon of ghost jobs a couple of weeks ago. It seems to be a lot of newspapers are talking about, look, actually recruiters are putting up fake jobs into up there for various nefarious reasons. And that is the explanation as to why you're not getting any candidate response, because the job was never actually there. So that was actually now promulgated on, huge newspapers like the Financial Times and all this. And I'm saying, you know what, the reality is that doesn't really occur. I mean, that's not to say certain the jobs cannot be published in this way. There is a small percentage of that phenomena maybe attributable to the fact of people maybe harvesting CVs, for instance. That does occur in small sense. But the vast majority of the reasons why those jobs don't sort of produce an instant response is overwhelmed recruiters getting too many applications, they can't handle it, or outdated job listings simply because the job might stay up there and you know what, we forget about it. Recruiters, there's an inefficiency in the system. We don't pull the job down when it's filled or when it's cancelled. We often don't know where the job's gone. Let's not forget there's aggregators out there that we don't give permission to republish the job, but it will appear. If I publish a job on my career site, for instance, I may assume, hey, I've just published on my career site, but an aggregator will scrape my career site and it'll stick it somewhere else, and it'll effectively look like a duplicate as far as the candidate's concerned. So all of that stuff occurs.
And you might not be aware that that's happening, I think, is really important. And this is a real problem. I literally was sent a job today for a global head of talent acquisition role that was scraped from another website, which this company had no right to be able to use. And I presume they sort of make money from advertising off the back of it or collecting your email or something like that. But they didn't ask that company for the access to that job to be able to post it. That was a bot that essentially scraped that and put it online.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's basically, there's lots of reasons commercially why you'd want to scrape data like that. Some of the biggest job sort of boards or job institutions on the planet basically made their entire business on scraping this data. Google itself could be described as the master scraper when you think about that. It's just a fundamental aspect of publishing something online. You lose control of it as soon as it goes out there. And then it gets reused. Now, from the candidate's point of view, they're just going to see, oh, look, there's yet another job from this same company. You know what? I applied for that on the career site, and why is it still there? Well, actually, once the thing's been scraped, how long does that job stay in that scraped sort of aggregator? We don't know. Do they do a real-time check to knock it out, or do they keep it up there for whatever reason?
Yeah.
Who knows?
And I think, like with a lot of this reporting, there is a kernel of truth often behind the story that ultimately ends up getting shared in mass media, either by kind of TikTok or by or in mainstream media. But the way that it's eventually perpetrated, and it's like the Chinese whispers, like someone's told someone who's told someone who's told someone who's misinterpreted, and each step is being misinterpreted and diluted slightly more into a story that ultimately, let's kind of call a spade here. You kind of pulled your punches quite heavily and were very political in how you responded there. But ultimately, I think they're doing this. It's a much better article that's going to get them much more traffic if it says, ghost jobs are taking your, companies are scraping your data or whatever. That's a much more going to get you many more clicks in this market than going through a detailed and thoughtful analysis of whether or not kind of aggregating job boards are helping or hindering the kind of global job market. Like, that's not an interesting article that most people are going to read. And I think that is partly the problem with content creation as a whole. And I think that's partly the problem that candidates face, is that the content they're being served is clickable rather than it being factual. And sometimes they overlap, but it's not always. So Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all. Where do you see the kind of next 12 to 24 months and the evolution of the AI, especially let's with a candidate lens, and how you think it's going to impact the candidate over the next 24 months?
I think that there's going to be some really interesting and probably innovations that will not be necessarily welcomed initially by candidates coming out of some of these vendors. So I've become increasingly convinced, for instance, that AI screening, so AI doing a pre-screening call to candidates will become increasingly a mainstream feature of recruitment. Now, why do I think this? I think that ultimately companies are really struggling with the volume of applicants coming into their pipeline, top of funnel, as you say. So that top of funnel problem, because you've got a human being managing it, is the primary reason why candidates are experiencing the CV black hole, in my view. So this is where you apply for a job, you simply don't get any information back from your application. And you wonder why that is. You chase it up, and actually, the recruiter, or probably you won't get through to a recruiter, but the default messaging is, look, you're in queue, we'll look at your CV at some point, we'll get in touch if you're going forward. And that's generally, I think, a hugely frustrating situation for many candidates, because you don't have closure. You don't have feedback. You don't know sort of how you stand in relation to other opportunities. Now, the primary reason for this is because obviously you've got overloaded recruiters in a very active job market. Now, companies, I think, will resolve this problem using technology. One of the technology categories that I'm becoming quite bullish on is this concept of AI screening. Scotty AI is an example of that, but there's others that are emerging. And everyone that I demo and I try, I'm getting increasingly convinced that, yes, this is probably going to be rolled out, and it'll probably be decent enough for it to get mainstream adoption.
So tell me a bit about what you mean by AI screening, because I think the immediate jump is to think it's screening your CV, but I don't think that's really what you're saying here. So tell me a bit about what you mean in a bit more detail. What do you see as the future interaction?
Yeah, so it's basically a pre-screening call. So
Yeah.
I thought that AI, like a voice call to AI, would be at least 5 years away. I assumed that, you know what, no candidate's going to want to do it. What's the potential damage to employer brand? The abandon rate's got to be super high for candidates, et cetera, et cetera. But over the past several weeks, I've been conducting basically every demo that there is to demo. So I'll be open season. All right, show me what you got. Put me in there as a candidate. I want to have the conversation. And each time I'm starting to become aware that actually the UX can be improved this way, and I'm seeing improvements. And you can also see how it's obvious. So for instance, what will happen is, let's say you see a job ad, and the job ad, you're interested in this job, and you're thinking, yeah, sure, it looks like I want to go forward with this. I'm going to apply for the job. That's fantastic. You apply for the job, but then you see within the ad, there's an option. It says, hey, listen, do you want to do an automated call? If you're successful in it, you go straight to the hiring manager. You don't even need to speak to the recruiter. And you can do it now without sort of waiting in queue. What do you reckon? I think a lot of people click that link because you're going to say, you know what? Rather than sit here and wait for the CV black hole experience, I want to get this resolved here and now. I want to speak to this bot. You click on it, bot calls you up, and it just does pre-qualification screening. So, and the levels of intelligence the bot has obviously differs. Some of them just do the classic knockout question stuff, which, by the way, a human recruiter would ask anyway.
So this would be, when your notice period, like how much are you looking to earn, like do you have right to work? Yeah.
All that stuff, which, by the way, is a waste of human recruiters' time, and it's a waste of your time also. One of the
and something that recruiters always like forget, like unless you're like diligent with your note taking and using like one of our sponsors, Metaview, like you forget this is really easy stuff that you go, oh my god, what the hell did that person say? Oh no, they actually have a 3-month notice period, not a 1-month notice period. I'm gonna have to go back to hiring manager. Like this is stuff that happens now, today, all the time. And so this says absolutely, it needs to be like automatically taken down as a product of some sort of technology. Yeah, absolutely right.
Just information capture basically, and it's information that you're willing to kind of exchange. It's nothing secret. But more importantly is the logistics of it is removed. So one of the problems with a synchronous call, human to human synchronous call, is that you need to schedule that. It's not obvious that, that can happen on the fly. This podcast that we're doing now, for instance, Matt, we had to set it up. We had to say this is happening at 9:30, and we had to create space. So these days we're in a world where people don't pick up the phone in any case. Things need to be calendarized and scheduled. That's a bit of work. Whereas this type of situation gives the candidate the time, the agency to determine the time as to when they want to do it. And suddenly it becomes, okay, everyone's got 5 minutes in a day, no matter how busy you are, you're not able to schedule on the fly all the time. So I think the logistics of it basically converts this to be a good idea to a very good idea. And there's different levels as to how far the AI can go. So some of them are able to interview based on the job description. Others are starting to analyze your CV. So analyze your application and compare that to the job description you're interviewing for. Even more advanced ones are able to analyze your CV and compare it not only to the current job that you apply for, but the other jobs within that organization that potentially you weren't aware of that may also be interesting. So suddenly all the possibilities start emerging when these sort of with the development of these tools. Now, are they particularly accurate? I think it's you can dispute that. Do you really trust the AI to make a judgment call? Do we want the AI to actually determine yes, no? All of these are product decisions that different companies will make. But at the end of the day, I do think this is going to happen. Certainly in certain segments, so the high volume hiring segment, I think this is going to happen.
Already happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll increasingly creep into other areas of recruiting as well. Yeah. So this is the first part of the conversation. So it's not like it's going to replace any human interaction yet, but it will replace that sort of early exchange of essential information, basically.
Yeah, I really completely agree with that. And I think where we've seen like the most amount of immediate disruption from AI is for high volume recruiting, where you're really sitting on top of it. You had a human that sat on top of an automation layer. And when you were trying to get through this sort of stuff as quickly as possible, and the biggest limiter to your ability to hire was your number of humans that you had doing the same call over and over again, and the time that you couldn't, and the ability to not have that person doing more than one call at any given time. And I've set up high volume recruiting infrastructures before. And I can tell you that it's essentially like a call center where they're going through like the same types of questions. They're checking the same things. They're doing the same right to work checks. And that will be rare because it's essentially an automation layer that has a conversational element to it. It's a really easy pull for an AI to take, to go and kind of make that more efficient for businesses and be able to do that at scale. And Scotty aren't a sponsor of ours, but maybe I should get the team on. I'm sure they'd love it. But they're solving that problem at scale for like significant businesses already. And there's lots of companies that are doing that. We are delighted to be sponsored by Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using Metaview across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with Metaview. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls. Okay, so as you sit here right now, Hung Lee from Recruiting Brainfood, what are the top 3 pieces of advice you would give to a candidate in today's job market?
I'm pretty crystal clear on these. Number one, we are moving into an AI-enabled world. So I think it's important, no matter what type of job you're doing, is that you become an AI-enabled individual. You've got to lean into this trend and not think that this trend doesn't affect you. A couple of reasons why you should do this. Firstly, it's going to make you more efficient. So there's an efficiency gain that you have when you're looking for work. You've got a limited amount of time. You've got to make sure every single minute of the day you're spending on the job search is the most impactful you can do. You can have. Using technology to make you more efficient makes sense. Second thing that's relevant with regards to this is that employers everywhere, companies worldwide, are looking to AI enable themselves. And one of the ways in which they're doing that is trying to hire people that are themselves AI enabled. If you lean into this, then you become a much more marketable candidate in any case. So that's the first thing you should do, AI enablement. Second thing you should do is that you should really lean into the collective intelligence of your network. So whatever domain you're in, most people have acquired a network simply through circumstance of being in the world of work or university, or whatever. You've got a bunch of people that know you, you know them. Guess what? You need to have a networking plan. You need to have a plan of growth and depth in your network. And the reason for that is because the network has intelligence that currently is not existing on the published media, and it doesn't exist in AI because it's not in the published media. So in other words, if you have a one-to-one conversation with a senior professional in your industry somewhere, and you have that conversation over a beer, guess what? The information exchange in that space is not existing in the public sphere, but it may give you a competitive advantage in this type of job market. Final bit of advice is that you need to also make more people know you. So this is where you need to improve your own personal profile. Personal branding is a term that obviously is no longer cool, hasn't been cool for 10 years, but it's another term we need to bring back and rehabilitate. Because in the world of AI-generated media, the more we're going to lean to the human premium. We're going to start phasing out of AI sort of generated comms. We're going to start like zoning out from that, and we're going to embrace people that are definitely human. Now, I think that creates an opportunity for people on the personal branding side. Can you show you're definitely human? Can you demonstrate the skills that you have? Can you do all of this publicly? I think all of that helps you in your job search.
Unbelievable kind of way to finish. Thank you so much, Hung. Those are some really, really good tips there. I won't spoil it and add anything else. Thank you so much for coming on and being on part of this podcast. There's so much we got into there, and I can't wait to see the kind of final cut of this. It's going to be a really fascinating conversation. If you are just tuning in for the first time now, this is the Open to Work podcast. And if this is your first entrance into it, obviously we're here to help people navigate the kind of world of work and their job search. And so hopefully this has given you really good insight into what that looks like. If you have any questions for us or for Hung, or want to see more of something or less of something, then write to us at opentoworkpod@gmail.com. And also check out our community as well. It's an amazing community of job seekers that can really kind of help supercharge your job search. It's opentoworkcommunity.com if you want to know more. So thank you, Hung, so much again. And I look forward to seeing you on the circuit soon and talking more about AI and candidates very soon.
No worries. My pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me on.